Hey, yeah, he's dead. The king of all Asia conquered the Persian Empire, got revenge for the Greeks. He just died, 32 years old, Babylon. So far from home. I wonder when he left, if he knew he'd never see the Mediterranean again. It's kind of a sad thought, but I don't know, I guess this whole air of him dying and everybody already clamoring for who's gonna rule next, it made me think of why on earth we even set out on this journey with him, and why we would stick with him through all of his crazy behavior and all of his need for more. And I think for me, it boils down to his curiosity. I think his curiosity truly about what the world held is the reason we just spent a decade campaigning through Asia. It's the reason we haven't seen our families for 10 years now. And even at the very beginning when we went to Troy and he wants to run the same foot race as Achilles, he wants to see the sights of where he's going and not just conquer. It was a refreshing narrative, I guess. It was a refreshing way to have a military leader who cared about the places he was conquering, who cared about where he was going, who wanted to know the secrets that it held. It felt like a really pure way to take over the world. And even later on, when he goes to the Siwa Oasis in Egypt, it's magnificent that he goes out of his way to go through this desert to talk to an oracle just to find out if he's the son of Zeus. And maybe that changed his course of action, and maybe it didn't. But at the end of the day, he walked through a desert to find out if he had a godly parent, to prove to himself that he did. And for me, the biggest moment of his curiosity just being this driving force on our campaign was when we were in India and we're hiking through the mountains and it's freezing and cold and all of us just want to turn around, and he wants to keep hiking through these mountains in our Greek sandals just so he can see the other side of the ocean that Aristotle told him would be there. Now, I don't know what he would have found if he kept walking, but the fact that his reason for marching through mountains was just to see what was there, it really speaks to his curiosity and his sheer joy at just seeing what the world had to offer for him, and that being his reason for conquering. But even with all that curiosity, don't you think he was pretty ruthless? It was hard to align those two parts of his personality these past 10 years. Just, he goes from seeing sights and running races at Troy to, before we left, just sacking Thebes. What? Because they insulted him? Because they didn't want to bow to a foreign power? I don't think Alexander himself would like to bow to a foreign power either. And I think that there's a certain amount of respect that we should have for people who stand up for what they believe in, regardless of what we think about them. But really, the ruthlessness of his campaign set in for me after we crossed through parts of Persia when we were sieging Tyre. And just because they wouldn't let him use the port, he spends months and months. He takes a solid chunk of time out of our campaign where we're supposed to be in Persia just to conquer Tyre because he's mad, because they insulted his ego. And I think that Diodorus Siculus puts it best when he describes this siege. He says, "And when the Macedonians entered through this breach and Alexander's party poured over the bridge onto the wall, the city was taken. The Tyrians, however, kept up the resistance with mutual cries of encouragement and blocked the alleys with barricades, so that all except a few were cut down fighting, in number more than 7,000. The king sold the women and children into slavery and crucified all the men of military age. These were not less than 2,000. Over 9,000 people in Tyre had to die just because they insulted his ego, and he couldn't handle that. He never liked when people wouldn't bow down to him, metaphorically or physically. And even with Clitus the Black, when he kills this man who was his friend, who saved his life, just because Clitus said, 'You're nothing without your dad,' he just would fly into these ruthless rages, and it was hard to align that. But I guess at the same time, he's also so arrogant that it's not surprising he'd be a little ruthless, that his ego would be so important to him. And just between having us call him the son of Zeus over this whole course and acting like we should be bowing down before him on our knees like he's a Persian king. He's not. And, calling himself the son of Zeus, I guess we didn't get it as bad as the Persians did, but Plutarch says it best. He says, in general, Alexander adopted a haughty and majestic bearing towards the barbarians, as a man who was fully convinced of his divine birth and parentage. But towards the Greeks he was more restrained, and it was only on rare occasions that he assumed the manner of divinity. Yeah, rare occasions he assumes the manner of divinity until he wants us all to bow down before him at dinner like he's a Persian king. And I get that to some extent he wants to treat the Persians the way they're comfortable, and he says they're used to bowing down, that this is what they're comfortable with, and I want to be their leader. But if you're going on a liberation campaign through Persia, maybe you should liberate them. Granted, maybe that wasn't the goal. Maybe he was just arrogant because Arrian, when he talks about a dinner where Alexander had people prostrate themselves to him, he says, Alexander sent around a golden loving cup, passing it first to those with whom the agreement about the act of prostration had been made. The first to drink rose from his seat, prostrated himself, and then received a kiss from Alexander. The rest followed suit. But Callisthenes, when his turn came, first drank, then rose to his feet. Thereupon Alexander refused to allow him to kiss him. And Arrian says of this, in my opinion, all these stories are deplorable insofar as they reflect upon Alexander's growing arrogance. And I don't have a doubt in my mind that he didn't want to make the Persians feel comfortable. He liked to feel drunk on this power, and he liked the feeling that it gave him, because after having his ego insulted all through Greece and the Levant, finally people are treating him like the king he wanted to be. Now, and then it's like, if he's that arrogant, the only thing that kept us with him was his magnanimity, was his ability to just, maybe you'd say manipulate us, maybe you'd say convince us, but whatever term you use, I'm thinking back to all the speeches he gave us, but particularly when we were in the desert and 60,000 of us had died in 60 days, and we were just beat down from thirst and hunger and climbing over the corpses of our friends that we'd known for our whole lives. We brought him water in the desert, and it was impossible to find. It was merely a helmet full. And Arrian says that, he gets this water, and what Arrian says he does is, in full view of his troops, he poured the water on the ground. And so extraordinary was the effect of this action that the water wasted by Alexander was as good as a drink for every man in the army. I cannot praise this act too highly. It was proof, if anything was, not only of his power of endurance, but also of his genius for leadership. And you know what? I guess if he got us to follow him this whole time, he had to have been a leadership genius, because he was so off the wall at points. And I don't know if I'd call it his noblest deed like Arrian does. Looking back, it does look a little arrogant, but it certainly rallied the troops. It made us feel like once again we were his companion. This wasn't the same king who asked us to bow down before him. This wasn't the son of Zeus. This was Alexander, who fought at the Battle of Chaeronea for the Macedonians. This is the Alexander who wanted to work with Macedonians and who valued his home country. And this was really the best of what he was. And at the end of the day, I can't hate the guy as much as I want to. As much as I hate that he kept me away from home for a decade, he was just ambitious, and it's hard to fault ambition. And I think, obviously he's ambitious. He takes over the entire Persian Empire, and he wants to keep going into India that we've never seen before against these elephants. But I truly think that when you want to look at his ambition, until his dying day, literally just a few minutes ago, Curtius says his ambitions knew no bounds. Alexander had decided that, after the subjugation of the entire eastern seaboard, he would head from Syria towards Africa because of his enmity towards the Carthaginians. Then, crossing the Numidian deserts, he would set his course for Gades, where the Pillars of Hercules were rumored to be. He would go to Spain, then he would skirt past the Alps and the Italian coastline, from which it was a short passage to Epirus. Until the day he dies in Babylon, he is driven and he has plans to take over whatever land he can find. Now, I don't know if I'd say he has had any plans to govern that land, and I think whatever we see with these successors is going to be messy business, considering he didn't set up a single, method of governing this giant empire he conquered. But the fact that he did it, the fact that this ambition coupled with curiosity just drove him literally to the ends of the earth to find answers, to find a way to be better than the people before him, that's impressive. He wants to do what Dionysus did. He wants to do what Hercules did. In the desert, he wants to do what Cyrus the Great couldn't. And I guess he did. But I guess we in Macedon, we can't fault ambition, can we? Maybe that weird southern Italian tribe would kill somebody for being ambitious, but we respect it. And I think no matter what, history is going to remember this man. And I'm sure they'll remember him as great, because undeniably he was. He conquered the known world for all intents and purposes, and he's the king of the four corners of the world now. And forever. He never got the chance to lose his empire. But I hope that people in the future don't remember him as a good man, because he wasn't. As great as he was cruel and ruthless.